Hmm. So what would be different if you ended up in the U.S. Congress versus your Democratic nominated alternative? How would you be different?
I think the primary issue is that I view the political system holistically as needing deep reforms and am offering innovative uh, policy outlines that aren't part of either party's agenda. So someone on the left would probably say, we need election finance reform. They might be even more innovative, as my opponent is, and say, well, we also need something like ranked choice voting. The problem with election finance reform is you need the Supreme Court to change their mind, and that's going to take a generation. So you need actually other ways for the people to bypass the gridlock and the dysfunction of the existing political institutions. And so those are the mechanisms that I'm proposing. One, the simplest, probably lowest hanging fruit would just to be have online forums mediated not by artificial intelligence that divides us and polarizes us and creates echo chambers, as does existing forum technology called social media, but forums mediated by artificial intelligence technology that do the opposite and create uh, that highlight and upregulate where there are areas of consensus from across the traditional political spectrum, to instead of upregulating vitriol, upregulating empathy and perspective taking, to really kind of show where the higher angels are modeling good behavior in a civic sense. So that would be probably the lowest hanging fruit. Um, a big thing that I would like to introduce, have you ever heard of nerds? Sorry, as nerds against not nerds against humanity, nerds for humanity. Have you ever heard of liquid democracy? I imagine you're.
I've not though. I've heard of data liquidity, but what's liquid democracy?
You probably heard of it in a different
Hmm.
term, but you can see that that's my Tom has brought up the section of my website. Those are all
Hmm.
drop downs with headers of basically small little essays of policy outlines. Make Plato happy, a qualified and liquid democracy is the bottom one. And a liquid democracy is the idea that the critique against democracy is a valid one, which was if you have a lot of uninformed people making choices about matters they don't know a lot about, you're not necessarily going to get good outcomes or good policy. So you need to balance, and that's the idea of a republic. You need to balance where there's a highly informed group of people that are still accountable to the public. And a liquid democracy is enabled by technology to have people like liquid flow their vote to people that they trust that know more about a given subject. So you can imagine, hey, I don't know a lot about farming. My friend Jim does. Jim, will you take my vote? You still get a vote, but you can flow it to other people. And I think that allows there to be trust and more knowledge. And those two things need to go together, right? You need knowledge and trust in order to have power.
Hmm.
And qualified democracy is is not just flowing of your vote, but needing to qualify on certain subjects to have a voice in those subjects. So those two things complement each other, allowing for there to be people holding the educated accountable, also allowing the people to be the educated to take the test as many times as they want. To materials to take the test are free. It's not an ideological test. It's just, can you understand what both sides are saying? Would you be able to represent the other side's point of view accurately in a way that they would agree? So I think we need tools like that in order to bypass the existing structure of moneyed interests controlling parties, controlling Congress, and the people having only one mechanism, only one check and balance on the government itself, which is voting every 2 to 4 years. Like that was the only way it could work in 1789 when information traveled at the speed of horseback. But today, the checks and balances from within the government, what the Constitution designed, are okay. And I'm not saying we need to get rid of the Congress by any means. It's just to add another check and balance from the people to the government to have more systems of accountability, more systems of public input. Because I don't see how there's any other way that the system will fix itself. It won't be fixed because finally one side or the other gets a supermajority. That to me seems incredibly naive. We need ways for something from outside of the current system to have more influence on it. And it has to be the people, as Thomas Jefferson says. There's no other safe depository for the ultimate power of society other than the people. So you can see there's a whole list of other mechanisms, or other tools, other innovations, other ideas. But those would be kind of the range of probably the easiest ideas, just to have a forum, and the most complex, the most comprehensive would be liquid democracy. And there's a range of steps in between.
I am a big fan of education. Tell us a little bit about your ideas around a comprehensive revolution in civic education.
I think one of the where I start to think about this is that conservatives tend to think and emphasize the role of the individual, and people who are more progressive tend to emphasize the role of the structures we live in and the institutions and the kind of social forces and the environment. And both are valuable to me, both lenses. And you can see this pretty clearly in crime, for instance, where conservative would say, like, crime should be handled by more police and more stringent punishments, whereas a progressive might say, like, well, what about poverty? Why is there so much more crime where there's poverty? Right? Those two things can both be true. And you can't, so I say that to be a parallel to what we're talking about, changing the health of our political system. You do need structural changes, and you also need a more informed set of individuals, of population that is better able to wield their power wisely. And the ways to do that, you could start the simplest would be re-emphasizing and doubling down on the resources and effort and emphasis on civics education in public schools. That's the simplest one. But ultimately, I think we need to educate the entire population, not just wait a generation for the existing crop of students to graduate and become adults. We need to educate the entire population, one, with the tool of social media that I mentioned earlier, to have processes that emphasize good, rigorous sense making, where people take the perspective and steel man the perspective of your opposing point of view, right? Like, say, okay, well, they might actually be wildly wrong in a lot of ways, but in what ways are their values actually important and need to be considered and synthesized into a bigger picture? That to me is the essence of what a comprehensive civic education does, is allows people to be better empathizers with each other and perspective takers, and to look for solutions that satisfy all values, even if one side has a lot more merit to it. Like, for instance, I think of global warming and climate change. I'm a renewable energy professional. I told you, like, it matters a lot to me that we deal with our sustainability crisis. But when I steel man the perspective of people who are deeply skeptical of a government response to climate change, I have a lot more sympathy for, they're not concerned with the environment. They're concerned that the government will overreach or, measure take the wrong metrics and try to emphasize those. And that's something I can understand. Is like, well, there's got to be a way we can satisfy that concern and satisfy the concern of the people who are really concerned with the risk of climate change, right? So to look for solutions that satisfy both concerns in a way that synthesizes the values of all the perspectives.
That's definitely not how people talk today, synthesizing the best of multiple perspectives. Like, you look at the politicians who are getting the most fundraising and are doing best in their primaries. It's clearly a playbook of kind of polarization and activation on emotional issues. So, like, if we talk about improving civic education, like, I could immediately see my MAGA friends saying like, "Oh, you're trying to bring your woke
Yeah,
agenda
yeah.
into the schools," and a lot of my MAGA friends are very big on like we should just take kids out of school, and each family should just do the homeschooling to
Wow.
protect them from indoctrination by the woke left kind of thing. And so I'm just wondering like how is this kind of messaging landing with, let's say you just came through a Republican primary. It sounds like good half of them are a bit on the MAGA side of the world. What do they say when you talk about your stuff? Like, were you able to break through, or did you just manage to get the 40% of kind of New England Republicans who are a little bit more moderate and independent minded?
I don't think there's any doubt that the MAGA Republicans would prefer me more than the Democrat. Um, I'm actually having a harder time on the Democratic side, where
Mm,
they see an R and they don't listen to anything I have to say. They assume that I am X, Y, and Z without ever actually letting me open
mm,
my mouth. So I grew up. I grew up at a time where, to me, the left was the more open-minded part of the political spectrum, and
mm-hmm.
there's lots of ways where that might not be the case anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. Let me just ask you, are there other things that you wish you had a chance to talk about that we haven't yet hit before we wrap up?
We definitely hit the big ones about the health of our democracy. There's one issue that I also try to bring up a lot, which is, so our economy is completely dependent on energy. All economies are like 100% linked. The more the economy grows, the more energy we use. And if we're to grow the economy at 3% a year, which is what every economist and every politician thinks is normal, to be sought after goal,
Mm-hmm.
at 3% a year, then we're going to use the same amount of energy in the next 3 decades as we have in the last 10,000 years. That means we're going to run out of oil and gas in around 20 years or 30 years. And within 10 years, we would have every square inch of American land covered in wind farms, or 10% of American lands covered in solar panels. So that energy cliff that we're driving off of with this model of never-ending growth on a planet of finite resources is something that neither party will bring up. They'll talk about how much they care about the environment or energy independence, but they're not talking about that growth forever is an unsustainable idea, and that the existing resources, whether it's fossil fuels or renewables, aren't adequate to the conversation. So we need to have new technologies, but also a new mindset and a new foundation of an economy. And you can't build a new economy that actually gets buy-in from the entire spectrum of the population without a profoundly healthier system of politics. So we're driving towards a cliff, and the only way off of it is healthier politics. And that's what we should be focusing on.
Well, Liam, thanks for coming on to the show. Liam Madden, running for Congress in Vermont, recently endorsed by the Forward Party, former Marine anti-war activist and renewable energy professional. Nice combination. And I hope we get to talk to you again in the future, Liam, and you
I
make
would be
some
so
waves
happy
over
to.
there.